Coming up today, the final session of the 19th National Assembly is set to begin. All eyes are on whether the parties can pass key bills before the new parliament opens next month. Korea's finance chief says Seoul will push ahead with industrial reforms in high-tech fields as a means of boosting economic growth. Plus, there's intense diplomatic activity in Seoul as fears grow North Korea could be prepping a fifth nuclear test in the coming days. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, April 21st here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, a month-long parliamentary session kicks off today, the last chance for the 19th National Assembly to deal with some key pending bills. The ruling Saenuri Party, which lost heavily in last week's general election, plans to focus on a set of bills aimed at revitalising the economy, such as those related to labour reform. The main opposition Minju Party of Korea is looking to go back to the drawing board and closely review those measures. The splinter opposition People's Party is likely to stick to its position of exercising its casting vote rights during the negotiating process. The three parties have agreed to hold 2 plenary sessions and working level talks in an effort to pass the pending bills. The 20th National Assembly will start late next month. Now, with the 46th anniversary of Korea's Saemaul Undong coming up on Friday, President Park Geunhye has called for an upgrade of the movement's role, both on the domestic and international fronts, for a look back and at the future of the movement that helped Korea emerge as one of the world's biggest economies. Song Ji-son reports.
한국의 성공적인 농촌 개발 전략인 새마을 운동을 농촌 개발 패러다임으로 발전시켜서 개도국의 농촌 개발을 적극 지원할 계획입니다.
That was President Park Geunhye's pledge at last year's UN Sustainable Development Summit to help developing countries through Korea's Saemaul Undong initiative, which was first implemented in the country in the 1970s. For a more effective implementation of the movement that helped and encouraged rural residents become more self-reliant, the UNDP and the OECD also carried out joint studies to cater the initiative to developing countries with customized programs. More than 70 countries have adopted the Saemaul Undong movement, which helped Korea become the world's 13th largest economy. And to celebrate nearly 5 decades of can-do spirit that helped Korea and dozens of developing countries take growth leaps, President Park Geunhye sat down with hundreds of local Saemaul leaders, stressing their role in uniting the nation and to help root out poverty still existing across the globe. She stressed the old model must be revived in a new manner to help the country overcome current challenges and to further expand the movement overseas.
정부의 네트워크와 여러분의 현장 경험을 더욱 긴밀하게 연계하면 새마을 운동은 한국을 넘어 지구촌 개도국들의 보편적인 개발 전략으로 뿌리 내리게 될 것입니다.
President Park also called on regional leaders to help lead our innovation drives as our initiatives on the creative economy, economic innovation, and structural reforms can only be realized with the nation's support. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's finance minister says the government will push ahead with plans to overhaul the country's industrial makeup, while Korea has been focusing on structural reforms in labour, education, finance and the public sector. Yoo Il-ho says the government is trying to foster new growth engines that can raise the competitiveness of the country's economy. Possible candidates are the Internet of Things, big data and artificial intelligence. Minister Yoo adds, though, that not all industries will receive government support, with many carrying high risks of failure. The minister says the government will concentrate on a select few. Now, there has been a flurry of diplomacy in Seoul in recent days aimed at reining in North Korea's nuclear and missile ambitions. South Korea and the US have held bilateral talks. Those two allies and Japan have held three-way discussions, and Seoul's foreign minister has given a high-profile speech. Gwon-soa reports.
On their second round of strategic talks in Seoul Wednesday, South Korea's Deputy Chief of the Presidential Office of Cheongwade, Cho Tae-yong, and U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken saw eye to eye that pressure on North Korea should be kept or strengthened. The two agreed to enforce efforts in the implementation of UN Security Council sanctions, as well as independent measures to support those by South Korea, the U.S., Japan, and the EU. On the same day, South Korea's top nuclear envoy Kim Hong-kyun and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Sung Kim and Kimihiro Ishikane put their heads together for response measures against North Korea's failed ballistic missile launch last week, as well as further provocations from the regime, including a possible fifth nuclear test. Seoul and Washington's representatives followed the three-way discussion with one-on-one talks on the same matter later in the day, said to have touched upon ways to increase cooperation from China in curbing North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons program. Evident in these strings of bilateral and multilateral discussions, Seoul's Foreign Minister Yun Byungse stressed during a lecture Wednesday that South Korea's diplomatic environment has changed over the years, calling for more omnidirectional cooperation in changing North Korea.
We haven't closed the doors to dialogue with North Korea, but as we can see through the UN Security Council's resolution, there is a clear global consensus that the vicious cycle we've seen in the past, meaning North Korea's violations followed by negotiations and again violations, must stop.
Minister Yun says there are already signs that show North Korea is feeling the pain of the measures imposed on the regime's latest provocations, saying that the international community has never been more united in its desire to resolve the North Korea issue. Gwon-soa, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea's foreign minister has arrived in New York to attend the signing of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. The United Nations is holding the signing ceremony on Friday local time, and the so-called Paris Agreement will replace the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency says Ri Soo-young will take part in the high-level thematic debate on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, where the North is reported to have asked to make some remarks. Attention is being drawn to whether the North Korean official will personally take to the podium. There's no word yet on whether he will meet with UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, though. The rare trip comes amid the mounting concern North Korea may soon conduct a fifth nuclear test. Now, some startling details are emerging about North Korea's failed launch of a ballistic missile last Friday. It has been reported that the intermediate-range missile exploded, sparking a gigantic fireball that wrecked the launcher and could have also killed technicians on the ground. Citing defense officials in Washington, the US-based news agency Washington Free Beacon says the missile blew up about 90 meters above the ground. It says US surveillance systems, both airborne and space-based, videotaped the explosion. According to a diplomatic source, the likely cause of the explosion was a faulty fuel system or a turbo pump failure, but no one knows exactly for sure what happened. The report added that 2 launches were set up for the test, but the North refrained from firing the second after the first failed in such spectacular fashion. The Pentagon has yet to comment on the report. An earthquake measuring 5.6 on the Richter scale struck off northeastern Japan on Wednesday night local time. According to the US Geological Survey, the quake hit at around 9:19 p.m. and was centered roughly 100 kilometers southeast of Sendai. That is near the area where a devastating 9.0 magnitude quake and tsunami struck back in March of 2011. There have been no major reports of casualties. However, as you can see there has been some extensive damage. The earthquake comes a matter of days after a series of strong quakes struck Japan's southern Kyushu island, killing around 50 people. And another earthquake has rattled the so-called ring of fire that wraps around the Pacific Ocean, this time in the Philippines. And the latest tremor stokes concerns that there could be more ahead, especially since earthquakes struck both Japan and Ecuador, opposite sides of the ring, within a short space of time. Lee Min-young reports.
Another seismic activity was detected along the so-called Ring of Fire. According to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, a magnitude 5 earthquake hit Davao Oriental, located in the southern area of the Philippines, early morning on Wednesday local time. The agency noted that there were no casualties nor damage reported from the quake. Following the deadly earthquakes that hit Japan and Ecuador last week, Wednesday's seismic activity in the Southeast Asian country has sparked widespread concerns that the recent series of earthquakes might be correlated as they continue to be detected in countries situated along the Pacific Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire refers to a long chain of active volcanoes and earthquake-prone sites that run around the Pacific Rim, and it is believed that about 90% of all seismic activities in the world occur around this area. As the Korean peninsula is located on the same tectonic plate as Japan, there are growing concerns that Korea may also be vulnerable to powerful earthquakes. Experts, however, say it's a highly unlikely scenario.
A large-scale earthquake only occurs on long monolayers beneath the ground and when pressure accumulates on them. But Korea falls under neither of those circumstances. Of course, we should be prepared for mild earthquakes, but there is almost no possibility that we could experience one like the ones that hit Japan.
The expert also pointed out that there is no causal link between the recent series of earthquakes, and rather the Ring of Fire could be going through a period of activity for the time being. Lee Min-young, Arirang News.
US President Barack Obama met with the King of Saudi Arabia on Wednesday to seek joint action on security threats, including Iran and the Islamic State terror group. Sources say Obama hopes to reassure King Salman and other Gulf leaders of Washington's commitment to their security. But the meeting is said to have been rather frosty due to the kingdom's discontent with the Obama administration's approach to the region, and more specifically Saudi Arabia. Sources say the Saudis have been disappointed by Obama's attempts to pull back from the region while giving more room for their arch rival Iran to expand its influence in the region. Also in Riyadh, US Defense Secretary Ashton Carter held talks on ways to counter Tehran's growing influence and fighting the Islamic State terror group. Mitsubishi Motors has admitted falsifying fuel economy data for some 600,000 vehicles sold in Japan. The company admitted to manipulating the tyre pressure figures in 2013 to essentially make up mileage rates. The president of the company said some 620,000 models were affected, including the company's EK Wagon and EK Space, as well as Nissan's Days and Days Rooks. Company representatives have admitted their wrongdoing and suspended the production and sale of the 4 vehicle models involved. With the news, the automaker's shares dropped by more than 15% in Tokyo. Now, punching in early and finishing late was the norm when Korea was rushing to develop its economy. But now that Korea is one of the biggest economies in the world, are Koreans managing to find more time to kick back and relax? Well, the stats are out, and our Kim Hae-sung breaks them down.
For many Koreans, an 8-hour workday is now the norm. Government-run Statistics Korea says from 1999 to 2014, the amount of time Koreans spent on average doing office and housework fell to just below 8 hours. The figure stood at nearly 9 hours in 1999. Meanwhile, the time people need to sleep, eat, and do other personal maintenance increased by an hour from 10 hours and 18 minutes to 11 hours and 14 minutes. Statistics Korea says leisure time changed little during the same period. Changes in government policies appear to have contributed to the work-life shift.
Korea's Labor Standards Act cut mandatory working hours from 44 to 40, and the Korean government has been implementing various policies to cut working hours to help improve people's quality of life and health.
According to Statistics Korea, adult women do 3 hours more of housework a day than men, but men are helping out a bit more than the past. In 2014, men spent 14 minutes more helping out around the house than they did in 1999, and women spent 33 fewer minutes on chores at home.
More women are joining the labor force these days, so the traditional perception of gender roles is changing, and more men are helping with housework.
Amid Korea's changing society, the trend of decreasing working hours is expected to continue. 김혜성, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for watching, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Our next one coming up at 10 a.m. Korea time. So until then, goodbye.